eventually you reach an upper limit and then you stall and then you crash. And once you get above that threshold and, once you breach that threshold, you can't come back down without stalling. And this is a powerful metaphor for understanding the credit creation cycle, where the central banks are, where the debt limit of debt issuance and all of this stuff is. And we're in that right now. When you get into a situation like that, it's existential for everyone because, look, they're going to stall and then it's going to crash and then all their power goes away, right? Because all of the assets that they generate all their power from have been inflated, elevated in value above a level that we can't, that they can't drop below without causing a massive crash, right? This is the basic argument. And I think Coffin Corner is a perfect metaphor for this in terms of just think of valuations of stocks and bonds and, levered loans and all of this stuff. So where we've been since the global financial crisis since 2008 was the coordinated central bank era after the dollar reserve standard died. The dollar reserve standard died in 2008. And we've been in the coordinated central bank era of monetary policy ever since, where the BOJ and the SNB and the Bank of England and the ECB and the Fed and the rest of them have all been coordinating monetary policy to basically do round robin QE to keep everything flying higher and higher and higher until eventually the whole thing has to collapse. So against that backdrop, what are we looking at? We're looking at a whole bunch of people trying to figure out who's going to survive the crash, who can actually steer this thing, and maybe the best way to look at it is that all of these planes are above cost, have reached that point, and everybody is going to start falling in different order, right? And as each one falls, and the operational limit of every survivor's plane goes up in effect, because once you've killed off the ECB, then that's a lot of debt taken out of the system, and therefore it gives more run rate to the Fed and the BOJ and everybody else, and then the BOJ fails, and then we have, and eventually, and my argument is that the Fed has the most power because it controls the issuance of the world's global reserve currency, which is changing, which is not going to be the case, say 10 or 15 years from now, as the world de-dollarizes. But for right now, that's where we are. So I think the Fed has the power, if it's got the right tools, to deflate everybody else and keep its plane flying while everybody else's crashes. And so now let's identify the fact. Now that you understand that, the problem is that the factions under this scenario are all going to change relative to what we've all been imprinted with thinking that those factions were, say, in 2008, 2009, even as late as like 2016 or 2017. So, was JP Morgan Davos in 2015? Did they really have a choice not to be? Is a better question. Because the minute Trump was elected, and the minute Brexit happened, and the minute Janet Yellen's term at the Fed was up, who did they put in place? A non-academic, non-globalist from the private equity markets, Jerome Powell. Did they put in another egghead academic like Bernanke? Did they put in an open freaking globalist who undermined, who did everything she could when she was, a regional Fed governor to undermine Greenspan? Janet Yellen? No. They put in private equity Powell. Guess who private equity Powell has deep relations with? All the New York money center banks. Who owns the New York Fed? The money center New York banks. Right? So who's the most powerful of the 12 regional Fed banks? The New York Fed. Like, this isn't hard.
And while you're talking about Powell, Tom, maybe this is a good point. I wanted to ask you a question about Powell's genealogy today in the podcast. And right. I think maybe now is probably not the worst time to jump into that, because a lot of people just think, okay, all the central bankers are aligned. They're all, coordinating monetary policy. But all of these facts about Powell maybe suggest that, maybe he's not part of Team Davos or Team Japan you can...
Yeah, so... Yeah, all I would say is, this is not, again, I always give credit where credit is due. Like, I didn't come up with this on my own. I didn't go and do the genealogy deep dive onto Powell. But one of my patrons did, and then posted it on our private server, our private discussion server that we have. And And we sat and chatted about it. And we're like, yeah, that doesn't sound like a guy who would be willing to, I don't know, throw all of U.S. commercial banking under the bus to Klaus von Schnitzel. I just don't see it. That Powell is 8th generation American, going back to the Virginia aristocracy, which effectively, was the prime impetus for and prime financiers of the early American Revolution against the British Crown. I mean, that's where Washington comes from. That's where, Jefferson comes from. That Virginia aristocracy. We're very powerful. And is Powell part of that? Is Powell going to be a race traitor to those people? It's a good question. Because it doesn't look like it from my perspective. So it's just something to think about. It's just another layer to this thing. And I remember when I first started thinking about this, before I even went public with it, the first thing I did was I went to my people on Slack. I knew that I had a couple of people who knew, who used to be, close to the centers of power in New York. Okay. I had patrons who were people like this. And I just said, hey man, does anybody here really believe that, that Jamie Dimon and company and Solomon and Lloyd Blankfein and the rest of them are all going to just, turn over the commercial banking system of the United States, the most powerful political and economic lobby in the world, over to a bunch of German technocratic commies? And they're like, no. I know these people. They're like, no, that's not going to happen. Right? It makes sense. They don't call him, and literally, they don't call him private equity Powell for nothing. This is the kind of thing that you have to really start thinking about, and then, realize that, do you really think Powell and Christine Lagarde are friends? Given that she wants to make, the world safe for climate change and coordinate central bank policy to fight climate change, and he's never once done anything other than give the most nominal lip service to fighting climate change through monetary policy. And, when you listen to Powell talk about these things, he's just obviously like fielding the question and trying to get rid of it. Same thing with retail central bank digital currencies. And I make the distinction between retail and wholesale central bank digital currencies. I understand the need to update SWIFT with some kind of wholesale digital blockchain or distributed database or, encrypted distributed database technology that's better than SWIFT, because SWIFT is, telegraph communications level technology. It's telephone for all intents and purposes. It's telephone based, for Christ's sake. Like, it's stupid and it's expensive and it's slow. It's being outcompeted by Bitcoin. It's being outcompeted by, it will be outcompeted by Ripple, unless Ripple is the thing that replaces SWIFT, which is what I think they're angling. Which I think somebody's angling for Ripple to replace SWIFT. And I think, others are angling for their version of Ripple to, I don't know who's going to win that fight. And I don't, and I know that there are a lot of people who are very heavily invested in trying to tease that out, and, more power to you. And, leave me comments, send me DMs, give me your take on it. I'm more than willing to and open-minded to listen, because I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it at this point. So yeah, but like, I just don't think the New York banks are down with what's going on, because it's clear that that the plan for the Great Reset and the plan for retail central bank digital currencies is the death of commercial banking in the West, or frankly, the world. And, what do commies want? Commies want no banking. Commies want centralized capital formation. They want control of the means of production. How do you get control over the means of production? By having control over who gets the capital and at what price. Like, this is basic stuff here. And we're at basic stuff because we're at the end of the system of obfuscating what has been basic stuff all along into overly complicated bullshit to bamboozle us into believing that this bullshit is right. When the whole purpose of all of it was that they all just wanted to sit there, erect their toll booths and get their vig. At the end of the day, these people are all mob bosses. That's all it is. It's nothing new. You know, you got one mob boss fighting another mob boss. You've got the commie mob boss versus the fascist mob boss. What's the difference? I mean, the banking system here in the United States is mostly regulatorily captured anyway. It's not even, it's a corporatist monstrosity, but is it better than what Klaus wants? Yes. Will we fight them after we get rid of Klaus? Yes. Do we hate them still? Yes. But do we hate them a little less than we hate Klaus, who wants us to eat bugs and live in pods and, make assisted suicide a growth industry and all the rest of it? No, I don't want to live in that fucking world. Piss on that guy. And this is it. And I think that, dude, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, Jamie Dimon's thinking exactly the same way I am. And he might even have he probably doesn't have a stogie in his hand or, drink anymore after the aortic section he went through. But, with his kale juice, which would be bad for him. And dude, seriously, it's what he's saying. When they go to the Hamptons in the summer and they think about this shit and they talk about it, these are the conversations, and they're having them just as frankly with probably even more invective than I'm pulling out out of my soul this morning. So, it is what it is. Just think like them and then figure out where it goes and identify their incentives, and then everything makes sense, or at least most things make sense.
I think the entire kind of macroeconomic picture you paint does make a lot more sense when you kind of realize, hang on a minute, we're at the end of an 80-year long-term debt cycle. The US is being challenged for its global reserve currency status. And when you look back over the past 500 years, every single time you've had an empire challenged and you've had somebody like a Europe or a China come up and challenge that quote unquote decline in empire, you always end up in wars. And when governments are over indebted, you always, whenever there's a fight over money, you always see wars and all sorts of things happen. So I think when we kind of add that context to the conversation, I hope people can maybe open their minds up a little bit to the fact that, hang on a minute, maybe all these central banks aren't aligned in their policies. And maybe the US is trying to protect itself as opposed to bail out the rest of the world.
Yeah, well, no, Luke, you've got it in one. There's a lot going on here, and the big question is who's trying to destroy the United States? Because if you look at the Biden, somebody linked me to a recent interview with Bill Holter over at JS Mindset, the guy who took over for Jim Sinclair. And Bill's a good guy, and I like Bill. A lot of respect for Bill and what he does, and he just kind of laid it out the other day. He just said, beautiful, kind of almost Ron White in his simplicity. Ron White's famous for saying you can't fix stupid. The Texas stand-up comedian. You can't fix stupid. Well, he's like, Bill Holter's like, this policy is so stupid it can't be stupid. It has to be intentional. And I've been calling these people vandals or traitors for forever. But, certainly since the Biden administration took over, it's just purely staffed by people who are vandals trying to destroy the United States at every level. Now, again, I have lots of specific and deep criticisms of my country, without a doubt. And part of the reason why I do what I do is because I have deep and abiding criticisms of my country and of my government. But at the same time, that does not mean that everything about the United States is bad, and anybody trying to take the United States down a peg is good. That is a false dichotomy.
And if you guys want to know what happens next with Tether and all of the US dollar stable coins that are backing themselves with US government debt, I highly encourage you to check out this full interview that I recently had with Tom Luongo over on the Bitcoin Made Simple YouTube channel, which is my main channel where all of my longer form content gets posted. The plan for this channel over here on the Fix the Money, Fix the World channel is I'm just going to kind of post clips and highlights of the longer form content that I'm making. So if that sounds like a good idea to you guys, let me know in the comments down below, or let me know if you want me to also post the longer form content over on here. But I really hope this video gave you some sort of value. If it did, feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really does help push this content in the eyes of more people. And of course, you can get yourself $10 of free Bitcoin with the link in the description of today's video. Amber is sponsoring this podcast. They're a great Bitcoin-only company, and they've just rolled out to 62 countries. And to celebrate, they're giving all of my listeners $10 of free Bitcoin. So check out Amber in the link down below. If the recent FTX exchange debacle hasn't shown you anything, it's that you should not trust these centralized shitcoin casinos, whether it's FTX, Binance, Coinbase, BlockFi, Celsius. You should not trust an exchange that is also selling altcoins, because that typically means that they're not selling you real Bitcoin on the exchange. So you should only trust Bitcoin only exchanges. So check Amber out. And until the next video, guys, I hope you guys have a good day. And links to everything will be in the description down below. See you in the next one.